Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Lord of Mercy, the Giver of Mercy. Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to Allah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Blessings and peace upon the Messenger of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace and mercy of Allah be upon you all. Thank you very much, Ben, for the introduction. Thanks all for coming. Deserve a special prize, really, coming out on a Friday evening in the rain for this most dry topic of Zakat. But of course, in reality, it's not a dry topic. It's very interesting, it's fascinating, and there is a lot that we can learn, inshallah, hopefully this evening, about Zakat specifically, but also I think things may come out which get us to think a bit more productively about Islam itself, because when we talk about Zakat, we're talking about a pillar of Islam, and therefore, as one of the kind of points that Ben mentioned as well, one of the things that we need to do when we try to understand what Zakat is all about is understand it in the context of the other pillars, and then in the context of Islam itself, and how all of these things are coherent and relate to each other. But what I'm going to do, because I know that one thing I've mastered in recent years is the art of the monologue, is basically start opening it out to you in terms of questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions first, to get you to think, and then we'll kind of slowly morph into the opposite sort of direction where you can start redirecting questions this way. So first, just to begin with some simple ideas. What is the meaning of the word Zakat in plain English?
So Zakat is of course one of the pillars of five pillars of Islam. So Zakat is technically tax, Islamic tax that we pay. So it's not what I think a lot of misconception is charity. It's not the compulsory tax that is for all Muslims.
And what about those who and everything? It's good, everything you're saying. By the way, just as Ben has said, those of you at the back, you're probably better off coming to the front because I don't really want to have to repeat everything that everyone says, but so that you can all hear. So just come forward, or don't, but then you might miss out. So there's lots of space. There's lots of space over the front. Okay, but coming back to the specific question, what's the meaning of the word? So linguistically, what does it mean? It's an Arabic word. Linguistically, what does it mean?
To increase, I think, or something like that.
Right.
To purify.
Okay, right. So we had tax, which is not the linguistic meaning of the word, but we had two contributions which are both part of the linguistic meaning of the word. Right. One is growth, increase, and one is purification. And actually, it's quite an interesting, quite an interesting that both of these come together, because oftentimes purification or cleansing involves reducing something or cutting off, if you like. So if you think about the idea of pruning, or kind of a classical or an old kind of analogy with a miswak, for example, the traditional kind of toothstick. If you're going to clean this up, you're going to cut the edge off, cut the bit off so it's fresh, and you use it again. But on the other hand, you have growth and increase and blessing. And interestingly, the word zakat and the word barakah for blessing are mentioned equal number of times in the Quran, actually. So the word and the word zakat is associated with this idea of blessing. So there's a purifying notion, but there's also a notion of productivity, growth, and increase. Okay. Here we've had a lot said about that it's not a charity, that as an obligation, perhaps the word tax is more appropriate. What do we think about that? Does everybody agree with that, or we think otherwise? How do we think about Zakat? How do you think about Zakat, sir? Do you think, if you were to try and describe it to perhaps like a non-Muslim friend or colleague or whatever, how would you describe it?
It's a financial, religious obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Tax is just a technical term, I guess.
Mm.
It's a financial, religious obligation which is compulsory, hence there has to be more behind it why you're having to pay it. And obviously there are other benefits, spiritual, etc., the same as praying, etc. So that's the kind of things I would think about.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose in technical terms, brother, you can kind of frame it as a wealth tax
Hmm.
in technical jargon or taxation
Mhm.
terms. If you were to step to a non-Muslim,
Yeah.
it's a kind of wealth tax,
Yeah.
a yearly wealth tax.
Mhm. Okay, so sure. So look, one of the things that certainly does need distinction is the idea of zakat. Let's just keep it as zakat for now, and the idea of charity. Obviously, in the English language, when we speak of charity, we speak of something typically that is understood to be voluntary, spontaneous, often reactive, right? When we speak zakat, although zakat, in the way that most Muslims nowadays fulfill the obligation or pay it, it often takes on that kind of characteristic. The way that our zakat is paid and organized typically actually has a very charitable feel to it, right? Such that in recent times it's interesting to note that there's many organizations that aren't necessarily even Muslim charities, Muslim-led charities, such as Oxfam and others, who have started to offer Muslims opportunity to have their zakat collected and distributed through those organizations. So that also raises an interesting kind of question, like, how do we process that? Is that fine? You know, is that okay? Like, is there an issue with that, or isn't there? We'll come back to that perhaps. But certainly there is a distinction to be made between the individual, personal act of giving or charity and zakat, which in principle is really a collective or a public resource, if you like. Yeah? And therefore, if you think about if you think about taxation as we experience it today, either at a local level, so kind of council tax, or a national level, income tax and other forms of taxation, we recognise clearly the importance of coordination and organisation. And we would find it completely bizarre if our local authority wrote to us and said, listen, you can pay council tax, you have to show and demonstrate that you've paid it, but use it for whatever you think is good and positive in the borough. You know, you just basically make your independent choices, each resident, right? So on the one hand, you have autonomy, which we all love nowadays, right? And we love choice. But on the other hand, you can see at a collective level, that's mayhem. Yeah, and eventually residents will be writing back to the council saying, please take this back on, because bins aren't being moved, that pothole's not being dealt with, right? And there's another way to look at it, another analogy, which is a nice one, because obviously when we speak of tax, zakat as tax in our particular situation, that causes its own complications, because obviously there's certain things that we already associate with the word tax within the context in which we live. And when we speak about it as charity, we've already said, okay, that may be problematic, because it's not a personal voluntary act, clearly. And then to say obligatory charity is a bit of an oxymoron, or a bit of a contradiction in terms. So a nice way to think about it actually is almost like this idea of membership fees. Yeah. So if you belong to who belongs to a gym, or is a member of a gym? Yeah. So if you think about it, like a lot of the underlying principles of what we through our kind of work and research on this subject now advocate to Muslims to think about as the principles of effective zakat operate very clearly in the context of, say, membership fees and, say, gym membership, okay? So, first, the example that we've already given, if you went to kind of sign up to become a member, and you were told, okay, 40 quid a month, 30 quid a month, whatever it is, again, you can make independent choices as members as to what you want to do, yeah? You want to buy dumbbells, buy dumbbells. You want to buy skipping rope, buy skipping rope. Mats, okay, go for mats. Yeah, you want to do something, you want to sort out the lockers and all of that stuff, do that, etc., etc., etc. So again, you have individual autonomy, but collectively this thing can't work for the membership at large, right? So there is no coordination. So you don't feel any reservation in the idea of giving that choice, the specific choices to obviously the management, and obviously you expect a good job to be done. Otherwise, you shift elsewhere in this particular one. But the idea is it's a collective thing. The other thing, of course, which is a very obvious thing in the context of this particular example, is that you expect that the income from these fees to be utilised for the purposes of those who have contributed it, meaning to create a better environment for yourself, but all members. Right? I.e., it is kind of localised, if you like, within that particular environment that you're contributing into. And finally, of course, you'd expect that the management would then spend on a diverse range of, call it products or services or whatever, because obviously they need to spend on security, right? And they need to have personal trainers, and they also need to have all the equipment and everything else, right? And perhaps if you were to take it further into let's say, a gym that might start to incorporate some of the Zakat principles, they might start to provide free memberships for people who can't afford it. Why? And this is a key point now, is that because there is something overarching, there's an overarching purpose that all of these people, as contributing gym members, have. And what is that purpose in this case? The aspiration to what? Be healthy, right? To be healthy. Okay? So this is the point now. When we give zakat, what exactly is the purpose? What's the point? What's the ultimate function that this act of giving is supposed to serve?
Fulfilling the obligation and cleansing your wealth.
Right. Excellent. Classic answer. Correct as definitions or certain functions. Yeah? And correct as individual purpose. Yeah? Meaning for me as an individual, that's what it does. But then I purify the notion of purifying my wealth, right, when I pay zakat, meaning effectively it's like when the time for your zakat to be paid comes, then that zakat left in your wealth is almost like almost has a subversive kind of effect in a way. It removes blessing. You're now in possession of something, utilizing something that is not even yours. Yeah, in principle. So it's like an impurity. It becomes like an impurity. You need to remove that. Okay, and you need to kind of pass it on. So yes, you purify your wealth. You fulfill the obligation. But why are you? To what end are you paying it? To what earthly end are you paying it?
Transfer of wealth from people who have money to those who need it.
Right, so transfer of wealth, right, from people from the have to the have-nots. Is that it? Is that the end goal? Simply wealth transfer, poverty alleviation?
If we take one of the literal meanings, it could also be community development, for example.
Okay, so
Essentially bringing growth to the society, to people's lives, what have you.
right, exactly. Yes, so that's on the other side, right? And that's an interesting thing with the purification and growth idea. So it's like a purifying more on the payer end, if you like, and growth and development on the recipient or the societal kind of end. But I want to bring this back to one of the statements we started off. Zakat is a pillar of Islam. Zakat is a pillar of Islam. So if it's a pillar of, it upholds. Yeah? Islam, as a phenomenon, should be more stable as a result of zakat being fulfilled. Right? And let's translate Islam. Subservience to God, submission to God on earth should be a more stable phenomenon as a result of the effective payment of zakat. Many of us never think of that. We never think of that. With salah and fasting and even hajj, that feels much easier to understand. I pray individually. When I pray, clearly I'm rejuvenating, strengthening, improving my connection with my Creator. Right? That salah, one of the literal meanings of the word salah is connection or binding. Right? I'm kind of shutting off from the world, reminding myself of who I am, who He is, etc. Okay, and you're making that connection. My Islam is upheld, and when it's done collectively, right, and we bring it together, clearly has a societal impact as well. And in the Quran, God refers to the societal impact, positive impact of salah as well. In one case, as a preventer of immorality and wrongdoing. Right? If 5 times a day you put your face on the ground and prostrate and remember your Lord, it should heighten your level of consciousness and conscientiousness, such that in between the short time, the intervening time between prayers, that you kind of have built a level of shame, that you won't basically go to excess, right, with the conscientious prayer. Similarly with fasting, which we're all about to embark upon. What's the purpose? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you will attain piety, right? You put more distance between yourself and the possibility of going wrong or angry your Lord, right? Similarly with Hajj, anyone who's been on Hajj or Umrah, okay, it's a hugely purifying and connecting experience. So all of these things we can understand at a spiritual level, if you like, are clearly raising the bar. They're lifting the person who does it, but collectively. When you go to the mosque, in Ramadan, which kind of combines a lot of the different things, especially the idea of the collective prayer, okay, is very much emphasized and has a collective effect. So this is now the key question, how does zakat play a role in upholding Islam? Well, the number one thing is to understand this. It's true at a personal level, yeah, but it's true at a collective level. But what we can definitely conclude, almost by definition, is that the purpose of upholding or furthering or strengthening Islam's subservience to God as a phenomenon on earth can only be fulfilled as a function or as a result of effective distribution of funds, utilization of funds, not simply by virtue of an act of payment. Right? So I pay my taxes in a nation-state context. I pay my taxes. I'm a loyal citizen. I've done my job. I fulfill my obligation. Did the tax fulfill its ultimate purpose in society on earth? Right? Well, that's another question, which may or may not result just simply because I did my job. Okay? Now, in that scenario, of course, you're kind of stuck in a way, meaning stuck temporarily at least until you decide that the government's useless and you vote them out, and then the next one comes in soon enough, they'll be useless and they can move on too, right? But what's interesting about this is that classically, this is exactly how zakat was organized at a state level, at an authority level, right? It was a function of the polity or the state to kind of make sure this is done in an organized way. So now the question basically is, for us, in our context, can we restore or bring about a set of a way of doing this or fulfilling this in such a way that has the similar underlying effect, that it doesn't become as it is today, which is basically kind of a bit just randomness. So everybody in this room, let's say there's 20 or 25, 30 people in this room, if we just take us all here, all of us, we calculate properly, accurately, we conscientiously pay our zakat, and we make our choices as to where it goes. The simple fact that the zakat of 30 people in this room will go in at least 30 directions, right, or different causes, almost by definition suggests that there's no collective or strategic or coherent output or effect that we here can possibly be moving towards. Because there's 1,001 avenues out there for how you can do it, right? And then you've got your individual preferences on autonomy. So it's the similar mayhem that would result from the members of a club individually making their choices, or local residents in a borough, whatever. Yeah. So we've lost the idea, and this is the point. We've lost the idea, understandably, but it's something that needs restoring. Is the idea of actually really getting organised about this thing. Because with 97.5% of your wealth on that day and 100% of your wealth on every other day, you have total autonomy. But at one basic layer. Yeah? Zakat is basically telling us, as far as your collective resources are concerned, get organised. And then when you look at poverty alleviation, and you look at community development, and you look at all of the things that zakat can be used for, you realise, wow, okay, actually the reason behind even poverty alleviation is to strengthen, preserve, promote Islam. How so? Why help the poor person anyway? Surely in God's eyes the world's just not important enough, right? It's just click over a finger and it'll all be over soon. So what's the value of that? Other than empathy and all the rest of it. What's the real value? What's the real value of connecting zakat with a poor believer? Beyond the fact that now they'll have their basic resources and all the rest of it. What's the real effect? Come on guys, I'm not being tragic crowd over here. Or is it just, am I losing you?
He will have more connection to the faith as well.
Absolutely, that's it. That's exactly it. Do not, and oftentimes unless one has experienced this really, right, either in yourself or in others, it's very easy not to realise this issue. Yeah? That the real reason, the fundamental reason as to why the Muslim has, and zakat is, I'm going to talk about it later, but it is fundamentally an intra-community resourcing mechanism. Yeah? An Islam building mechanism. Without at all taking away from the fact of our societal obligations, like, in terms of care and giving and all of the rest of it, right? The real value is that when this poor believer presents him or herself to the community, and when that community is not there for that person, then clearly, then that's going to cause a dislocation in terms of community bonds, right, and in terms of their affinity to, like, this collective. Okay, and ultimately, yes, it will eventually erode their faith. The more desperate you are, the more difficult your scenario, the more hopeless your situation is becoming. Without the support, you will lose that. And so we know that, for example, in parts of the world, right, activities of various faith groups, okay, may have turned entirely Muslim areas, okay, into communities of another faith entirely. It's not because those guys sat down and had a theological discussion about, I don't know, whatever, and decided actually, Islam doesn't really make too much sense, let's go over to that one. No, it's because they're hungry and bread came and a message came. That's it. Simple as that. And it was easy. And by the way, to bring it more closer to home, and this is one of the ironies of our current situation, many Syrian refugees who come to this country are no longer Muslim. Because we're somehow, for some weird reason, very good at giving so much money when it's just at a distance and we feel good and like tick the boxes and we feel the reward is up there. We've almost over-spiritualized the kind of giving. Because almost the impact doesn't really matter, I've done my bit, my things in the hereafter. But those same people, or some of them at least, when they're here, and they're still in need, still traumatized, still in difficulty, still need a community, we're not there. So we don't care anymore. It's a weird selective kind of approach we have. And then a lot of them, it breaks down, right? And then they go to where they're taken care of. So it's a really critical thing to understand that, and that's how it preserves. Just like we should think about the welfare portion of Zakat exactly as we understand the welfare portion of the government spending here. The government doesn't do welfare out of primarily an individual empathy for the individual poor citizen. It basically to keep the whole ideal of the nation state together. I mean, overall, that's not going particularly well right now, right? This is if ever there was a disunited kingdom, it was pretty much in 2019. But the idea is, you stop doing that, and you're just going to have basically like civil strife. Yeah, things won't be kept together. And then therefore, the possibility of them believing this ideal of British values and whatever this stands for, just goes away. But it's the same thing here. You can't aspire to fulfilling your human spiritual potential if you don't know where your next meal is coming from. And that's what the significant point is. Alright, any questions? Thoughts?
Yeah. See something about what you just touched on there is very interesting from a government perspective, taking back to UK government. Their values, their British values that we just outlined, they actually do an element of dawah work. You can argue in the context of, they actually have as you know, food deficit, they have a specific policy, I think it's 0.9% of gross national income has to go towards that budget.
That's right.
So that's a form of their own giving from
to serve the national interest, of course, yes,
soft power or soft skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and let's move on to that, right? So, how many categories of zakat distribution are there in the Quran?
7 categories. 7 or 8.
Close.
6.
Oh man, you're getting the wrong way.
9.
9, oh my god, it's 8. That was a long way around, guys. So, 8. So 8 categories, yeah? So these 8 categories, so can we name them between us? One? Anyone? Any order?
Orphans, travellers.
Orphans are always said, I don't know why it's always said first, it's not there. It's not there. But everyone says orphans first. Travellers, yes. Travellers, when we say travellers, it's not like, okay, I'm going to Dubai, I'm now okay? The idea is, and it's a very interesting category actually, but the idea is, so in Arabic it's Ibn Sabil, which literally means like, son of the road, yeah? So basically it means like a destitute wayfarer. Somebody, so this is the point, why it's distinguished from the poor, which is the number 1 category, fuqara, yeah? Meaning almost abject poverty, yeah? But why it's distinguished from that is that basically, and it comes back to this idea of that this person, it's not that they're not wealthy, it's that they're dislocated from their wealth. So basically the idea of giving zakat to this person is to restore them back, to help them back to get back. And classically you can understand, I mean nowadays it wasn't, nowadays it's maybe a lot easier with access to the banking, whatever else. But classically, you face highway robbery, right, on your long travels. I mean, that's a bad situation, So the idea is now you're helped to get back to whatever you're, to a more secure situation. Funnily enough, I just do a quick diversion. We actually dealt with one of these kind of Ibn Sabil scenarios once at National Zakat Foundation, where of a family who was transiting through London on the way back to Trinidad having performed Umrah. So on the way, so basically, so on the way back home, they were in a situation where I think on the flight from Jeddah to London, like I think it was I think 2 elderly parents and 1 son, but the parents, or one of them, became particularly unwell. And so when they came here, they basically was like quarantined. You can't really move on, and they needed attention and help and whatever else. So it was almost this transitional period where they needed like the support and help and whatever as travellers, kind of were being waylaid temporarily before they then moved on, provided that bridge support until they could, for about 3 weeks or so, until they can move on. Okay, so we've mentioned now the first and the last. Okay, so
Miskeen.
okay, miskeen number 2. Okay, this is another interesting thing. So first you have fuqara, second you have masakin. Okay, which basically typically the poor and the needy. So what's the difference? And why distinguish them as avenues of support? That's the key thing. Why help the person? The objective of helping the person in abject poverty, in the first instance, is to what?
Survive. Survival.
Right, exactly. Like, call it poverty alleviation. Somebody who's now not in a dire straits, but they're struggling. What's the purpose of supporting them?
Stop them falling into it.
Yeah, or stop them falling in, and so express in reverse empowerment. Yeah, economic empowerment. Really, specifically, to help them become zakat payers. Okay, so when you think about this as sort of fiscal policy, it's literally basically saying, okay, you've got like the pure welfare part of it, okay, which is your minimum, but it's like, what's the kind of, the help to work program and all this kind of stuff, basically. And even in our work, we have to specifically distinguish that. Yeah, like when somebody comes and presents a situation to us, so we deal with like hundreds of these kind of applications every month now for Muslims around the country in difficulty. It's like we've specifically named our program for that, the Economic Empowerment Program. Why? Because with the objective, really, the end objective, if we can pull it off, is to help this person get to a situation not just where they're just about surviving, but where they can actually be helped in a way and directed in a way where they can be in a position of generating a surplus and paying zakat, which alhamdulillah has happened in many occasions, right? And then in that context, you may provide relief and whatnot. But sometimes people present themselves in such dire straits that before you can even have a conversation about that, you just need to do the basics and get a roof over their head first, and then you can move on. Okay, so that's first 2. So what's the third category after the poor and the needy? Then any others or any others? 3 out of 8 so far. It's not looking good, City Circle. Sorry.
The one whose heart is coming to Islam, so people who are
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so number 4.
embraced Islam recently, or they're looking into Islam.
Right. So this is what I'm going to relate this to some of the point you made earlier. So this is the 4th category, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم. Okay, those whose hearts are to be made, are to be reconciled, or won over, or inclined. Yeah, that leaf it comes on like alif. Yeah, it doesn't make it sort of one, right? So ta'lif al-qulub. This is basically, when you look into it, and you look at all the scholarly writings on this subject, right, over the centuries, it is basically modern parlance PR. That is literally what it is. Yeah. On a micro level, that PR is not the right word. Yeah, but it's almost like feels like a sort of da'wah type thing, but something. What's going to warm someone towards Islam, Muslims? But at a macro level, when you're talking about that, well, that's just PR. That's just basically what everyone does. Every group that has an interest, a cause, something they're pursuing, part of their resources they're going to spend on basically winning other people over. Yeah, and if they're not going to join, well, at least they're not going to hate. And this is the point. We as Muslims, I think, should be thinking like, and this is where you have to connect the idea of zakat being a pillar of Islam, because it stands completely to reason and to sense. Yeah, although not necessarily to what we're used to, that the divine who institutes this particular giving or form or particular institution would expect that as a result of it being properly organized by human beings who bear witness to him, that the people in the society will be more inclined to the way of life that he's effectively inviting people to. I mean, it makes sense, right? So when we know that recent statistics show, roughly speaking, half of the people in this country, for example, outside of the Muslim community, have a negative or sort of uncertain idea or views of Islam and Muslims, then we need to own that problem and we need to basically put money into dealing with that issue, right? And even though it might not kind of equate with what we're used to, or we might think, and then we do these kind of these unfortunate kind of red herring sort of comparisons between, yeah, but what about that poor person? Okay, fine. And then this comes to another question. You know, first of all, one that there's a notion of a balanced budget, so let's look at that as one thing. But the other thing is, of course, that the kind of poverty that Zakat is trying to deal with ultimately is which one? It's not material poverty. Because clearly, as we said, even with the poor, the material support is a means to an end, a higher end. So clearly, when we're trying to, it's not the PR, call it for Islam and Muslims, it's not for the sake of just the PR, right? It's for the sake of the fact that to put it really in endgame terms, endgame is a useful kind of thing to mention nowadays, but to put it in endgame terms, to literally make paradise as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. I mean, literally that's what it is, you know? Because the opposite of ta'leeful qulub is what? Tafriqul qulub. Tafriq means division, animosity, prejudice, bigotry, all of the negatives that we know that exist out there. Right? So we can basically use our resources to achieve the opposite. Alright, what else? Any other categories? So I'll summarize it very quickly. Alright? The third is the amilin, the workers and the administrators. So Muslims have a real problem with admin costs. Although God kind of says, do it. Yeah? So the third one is amilin. And why it's interesting is because it goes to this idea of organising. If he's saying to use some of the money to make sure that the people who need to organise it are paid to organise it, so it's properly organised, then it suggests that it needs to be organised. Yeah, that it's an institution in its own right that should have some people. It's literally like the people working in the Zakat institution, okay, and other kind of individuals are almost like the kind of the civil servants of the community, right? That then, and just as we would expect, whilst we, so civil service has maybe a bit more of a positive spin around it, but other people might regard it as bureaucrats, or sort of time wasters or whatever it is, right? But the point is, you need to have something there, some people there to get the job done. Okay. Then you have there's other welfare categories. So I won't go into detail now, but there's other categories that relate to welfare. 5 out of 8 fundamentally relate to different forms of individual welfare in society, and to move people's situation on. One of them relates to the administrative aspect, right? If you like, the hub, just to keep everything going. And then 2 of them, one of which is the inclining hearts, and the other one, which is fi sabilillah, basically, which means, in God's cause, in God's path, meaning what's in the interest of making this path to God more open for people, yeah? That you basically support those things. So that gives us the idea of actually, yeah, there's a lot more to this than simply this kind of individual linear relationship between one payer somewhere and one recipient somewhere. That it's a system and it needs organising. All right, I'll stop talking. Any thoughts, questions? No? Ben, you go.
I was going to say, do you maybe just want to talk about a little bit about some of the sort of practicalities, because you set out there in sort of quite a lot of depth the sort of background of how Zakat is to be used.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want to maybe go into some practicalities about
Okay.
how you calculate it and sort of how people actually go about
Brilliant.
sort of
Fine.
making the Zakat contributions during Ramadan?
Yeah, sure. That's when everyone comes alive with the calculation questions. All right.
We're not going to get too mathematical, guys, don't worry.
No, just divide. If you can divide by 40, you're all right. 2.5%. You get pretty good at dividing by 40, by the way, when you're doing it for this long. So, all right. First of all, I'll ask you. So, why do so many Muslims pay Zakat in Ramadan?
Multiple rewards.
Okay. Should Zakat in principle be paid in Ramadan?
No, it doesn't have to be.
Okay. When does it have to be then?
So it's really based on not the Islamic year of when you paid it. So it's actually, if you look at it in relation to the Gregorian calendar, then it's actually less than 12 months. So it's not the exact day that you've given it, but it's actually slightly earlier, from my understanding.
Okay. But which day? So let's take the lunar calendar. Then which day of the lunar calendar do we do it on? Then? Yep.
Technically, it's on the day that your wealth first exceeded the minimum point, but most people won't know that date. So.
Right. Okay. Exactly. Yes. This is an important thing to understand. So first thing to understand is that we know zakat is an obligation. The question is, when does it become an obligation? Yeah, and the time that it becomes an obligation is exactly the same time that prayer was an obligation and fasting was an obligation.
I've debated with myself, for example, whether it should be done more frequently, for example, on a monthly basis.
Okay, we'll come to that in a second. Yeah, we'll come to that in just 1 second, right? But in terms of in principle, when does it become an obligation? The first time, well, at the same age that prayer is an obligation, fasting is an obligation, etc. And on the condition that, as was mentioned, that the disposable money that you have exceeds the nisab. Okay, the nisab is basically the threshold. Okay, so just as you have a tax-free kind of threshold, right? Nowadays, a certain amount on which you don't pay and after that you pay, right? Similarly, with zakat, it's a similar thing. Now, at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, this was expressed in the context of what the means of exchange of the time, silver and gold, and then the zakat is also, by the way, in crops and cattle and all these other things as well, and at different rates. So it's not just 2.5%. In those situations, there's other rates apply as well. But assuming that no one's a farmer here, we'll stay with the 2.5%, right? Which is that, and to say that in silver and gold terms at the time, okay, is expressed in this: if you have this much, then you pay, right? Say 2.5%. Which today, obviously, silver and gold have diverged and are driven by all sorts of other forces, right? But the silver value today, the nisab, is around £250–300, and in gold terms, it's around 2,500. There's another old debate to be had, definitely to be had, about is it even relevant to actually relate the nisab to those measures anymore, because there's no, they don't have any inherent bearing anymore on real life and cost of living and all the rest of it. Another debate. But let's say we go with those for now, and we recommend basically just go with the more conservative one from a payer's perspective, because then at least you safeguard yourself. But then if you do that, of course, only 300 quid. So if you're 16, finish your GCSEs, and after celebrating momentarily, you get your first job. And that summer, within about a couple of weeks or a month, assuming you're not completely...
What summer job were you doing that was 300 quid a week?
It was good back then. It was Sainsbury's, I remember it. Clip-on tie with that chilies all over it. Yeah. Anyway, so we've been downhill ever since. But by the end of that summer, like you've at some point crossed the threshold now. So when you pay zakat, I've crossed the threshold. When do I pay?
After a year that you've had that.
Right, exactly. So as soon as you cross the nisab, your Islamic financial year has now begun. And on the same day, in a year's time, you'll assess your affairs again relative to the nisab. If you're above the nisab again, then you'll pay 2.5% of what you have. As was rightly mentioned, most people have no idea. I mean, the idea for some of you of casting your mind back to those times would be rather daunting. Yeah. But there is one important point to mention, which is that are there years when you may have had to pay zakat, but you didn't? Yeah? Fear not. We have the only resource, we think still confidently to say, the only resource on the internet available, MrZakat.com. Yeah? Powered by the National Zakat Foundation for all the, and there's probably globally billions that are like of zakat that hasn't been paid. You know? So if this website takes off, then that would be pretty good. But definitely, on a serious note, check it out, because we do get sometimes someone realizes it's important, it's an obligation, it's very serious, of course, and it's not one that disappears. You know, it's interesting with prayer, the obligation of prayer. There's a discussion about it. Like, if I've missed prayers and I've become more conscientious, do I need to make up for the previous prayers missed, obligatory prayers? And there's a difference of opinion on that, like long-standing one. About some say yes, you do need to make up. So every time you pray al-Dhuhr now, pray an extra Dhuhr for the one before, and keep doing that, right? With zakat, there's barely any difference of opinion, meaning that it's payable. Yeah. So you need to go back, work it out, and then get a payment plan going. That website can help you think about how you do that. You choose a date now, and this is the point. Everyone here, you should know your zakat anniversary as well as you know your birthday. All right. Meaning that date is effectively now your calculation date and your payment deadline date. So coming to your point, can you pay in installments? Yes, you can. You can pay over time, but you should do that in advance of your calculation date, right? So you make some approximation of what you might be, for example, start to do that. When it comes to that, so your calculation date or your zakat anniversary, say for example, for many people it's in Ramadan now, because they arbitrarily select something that's memorable and all the rest of it. So for me, I do it on the 27th of Ramadan, right? So 27th of Ramadan, okay, and I've held to that, and that's the other point, you hold to that date now, and this also takes out the confusion of, do I include this or not include that, and all the rest of it, because if you just stick to the date, then whatever your affairs are, it's a balance sheet or a snapshot calculation. It's not a cash flow or call it P&L income statement type calculation, right? What's my affair? What are my affairs today? So then I look at my, on that date, I make my calculation in relation to my situation on that day, but I should be paying today. If I have paid over the course of the year some, then I just net that off. And you can pay in advance up to 2 years, so it can carry over too. Right? So if you end up paying in advance of your calculation date, you make your calculation, you've paid more than is due, that can, the balance can carry over to the next year. Yeah.
Question I had, so let's say we're above the salary, it's been every year, it's second year, but in between our sort of saving, you could say fluctuate.
Yeah.
You know, so let's say mid-year, I've got double the savings of what I had at the start of the year.
Yeah.
And that's why the question came to mind is, should I sort of be paying on a monthly rolling basis?
Yeah.
But it can get even more complicated than that.
Yeah, if you pay on a monthly basis, you're not paying it in relation to your, you're not making a calculation in relation to your affairs on a monthly basis. You're just paying it in advance, like it's just a way of doing, you're sort of managing your sort of financial situation basically.
So haven't you basically once a year, particular date?
Yeah, that's your calculation date. You can pay in advance of it, but then it's not, the actual figure is calculated on the basis of what your position is on one day of the year, every year. You ignore the fluctuations, yeah? You ignore the fluctuations.
Just very quickly from me on a related point. People arriving late, I was going to say there are plenty of spaces towards the front of the room if anybody sort of can't find seats at the back. I was going to say you're welcome to come forward.
Okay, what do we pay Zakat on? Okay, what do
I'm going to be interested in your answer to this actually, because I was going to, I've always assumed that it was on income. But I've met a few people. I was absolutely aghast when people told me that they calculated it based on wealth. Because that, well, I mean, for some people those are going to be kind of quite different things. For some people, income's going to be greater than wealth, and for other people it's going to be the other way around. So I'm not expressing an opinion, but I'm going to be. My ears are going to get now.
The chair sits on the fence. There's always a good position for the chair to take it. So what is it, guys? I mean, you guys mentioned at the beginning. Yeah, it is a wealth due. Yeah, it is a wealth due. And so, because in a way, the idea is, look, you live your life, you do what you have to do throughout the year. Where are you left over at the end of it, and then you pay 2.5% on what you almost like maybe it's like you're clearing your balance, purifying your wealth, if you like. That year, and then your next year starts, and you go forward. Yeah. So it's true, it's not on income. I think most people probably feel their income is quite sufficiently taxed at the moment. Yeah. So it's not on income. It is on the wealth. It is a balance sheet calculation. And interestingly, just as a side point, I mean, the idea of in the context of wealth transfer and redistribution of resources and all the rest of it, the notion of a wealth tax is gaining a lot of support nowadays across the world. Right? I mean, just a couple of weeks back, Elizabeth Warren, who's the Democratic presidential candidate, tweeted about the idea if we had a 2% wealth tax, funny, 2% wealth tax, right? She literally, we'd be dealing. I can't remember exactly all the specific, but we'd deal with A, B, C, D, and E, and we still have $1 trillion left over, right? So the amount of trapped wealth there is, like, and if you're interested in these things, there's a guy called Ray Dalio, who's basically one of the most successful kind of hedge fund managers alive, made a lot of money, and he just recently, a couple of weeks ago, wrote a long article about the problems with capitalism, why it needs reform, and yada yada, and all this kind of stuff, right? And the idea of basically, which we all know, that everything becomes very polarized. Yeah, the extremes become more extreme, and then in relation to that, you have your socialists who strive for populism, all this kind of stuff. And one of the major ways to deal with all of that at the moment, as also advocated by Thomas Piketty, and probably the only economics book that really had any fame in the last 10 years or so, is basically wealth taxation, which is exactly what Zakat is. I mean, the global Zakat potential, by the way, is close to $1 trillion a year. And that's, I mean, on Muslim-owned wealth. It's ridiculous. I mean, if that was paid or properly organised, I mean, in this country, if every Muslim in this country who should pay Zakat paid Zakat properly, how much would be generated on an annual basis? These are the kinds of questions I ask myself.
Probably around 200 million or something.
Yeah, more than that, I think.
Billions.
Yeah, well, I think about billions, right? And we're doing all right. We're not that well, all right? But at least $500 million, right? And probably quite soon. It probably will go. The potential will cross $1 billion because just by 2030, the numbers of Zakat payers will almost double because we're such a young community, right? That just in 10 years' time, I mean, all of your university graduates now, etc. That's what they're all moving through. Right? And over time, so like we'll be more prosperous. You know, your middle class is growing, your business owners are growing, entrepreneurs, etc., etc. Just imagine if that. I mean, a lot of that is not even paid. Yeah. And then what is paid, like we were saying earlier, is kind of just it's just scattered. It's really random. In isolation, individually, everything might look good, but collectively, you zoom out and you look at it, it's just chaos. And in 99% of cases, is motivated by the reward, the obligation, all of that stuff, fine. And alleviation of poverty in what is often a rather secular or philanthropic humanitarian kind of intent, which doesn't go high enough or far enough to what the real intent is. Anyway, let's leave that. We'll come back to that. Calculation, anything else? So it's a wealth tax.
Just coming back on that though, I mean, if it is based on wealth, I'm just thinking back in the context of the Western world, a lot of wealth is tied up in completely illiquid assets. I mean, for most people, the biggest purchase that they ever make is a home.
Right.
And
So is Zakat payable on your home?
No.
Who says no? Put your hand up. And who says yes? And some of you are like, I rent. So is Zakat not payable on your personal possessions? Things that you buy for your personal utility are not zakatable. So I don't pay zakat on my house, my car, my bag, right? I might have very expensive taste, right? But I don't pay zakat on like my really nice whatever, yeah? No. You don't pay zakat on any of that stuff. So when we say wealth, that needs qualifying.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, you can take a breather now. Heart rate's dropping over here, right? We say wealth, we effectively mean, cash as a kind of called a gold silver equivalent for the time, meaning your means of exchange, you have that, so disposable wealth, as well as, so basically cash and anything that you own, anything that you own, that the only reason you own it is because you're hoping it'll turn into cash. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean basically, like in a business context, stock, yeah? The only reason you're buying is to sell it. Then that is an asset for sale, okay, and then receivables and all the rest of it in a business kind of context. So it's not even if I own, so I will come to you. Okay, even if I own like multiple properties, that doesn't mean that all of those properties are zakatable. It depends on my intent. If I'm a property developer, I'm only buying the house to build up and sell it on, then yes. Yeah? But if I'm buying the house a second home, it's my home and I'm renting it out, I choose to generate income from what I possess, then the property itself is not zakatable. Yeah, and not even the income, technically speaking, remember, but just the cash that I have left over from my income on the day that my zakat is due. Yeah? Alright, now I'll come to the back on.
So, interesting. What about jewelry?
What about it?
So, some like gold jewelry. So
Yes.
you purchased it just for yourself.
Yeah.
Does that count as a possession? Because I thought it wasn't. I thought that counts as
Zakat. Yeah, right, so you've gone to the heart of a centuries-old debate, right, on the issue of gold and silver jewelry, okay? So basically, if a lady is wearing a gold ring, should she pay zakat on it? So who thinks she should? The men are like, yes. She must.
This is supposed to be a gender-based question again.
Well, it's funny because we're going to come to that. I have dealt with situations myself where there's major domestic issues on this subject. I'm not joking, and I'll come to why in a second. Yeah, but so who thinks the opposite? She shouldn't have to pay. Okay, there's lots of uncertainty in this room. So
It depends on the school of thought you follow as well.
fine. Okay, so this is where the division is. So some say, basically, cut a long story short, some say gold and silver. Obviously, as we said earlier, as the means of exchange, were they zakatable because they have some inherent status, gold and silver, yeah, some God-given status as wealth, yeah, that in any form that you find them subsequently until the end of time, they are zakatable. And the Hanafi school basically broadly concludes yes. So whatever the format that you find this gold and silver in, whatever the intention, it doesn't matter. You put it in your attic in a box and it sits there for years, you wear it, it doesn't matter. You just make some sort of calculation and payment on it. And the others say, no, if you, as consistent with the other view of for personal possession, if you're wearing it, you're using it, even if, and basically to express it more accurately, if you don't regard it simply as a store of wealth, if you regard it as a store of wealth, and obviously culturally, a lot of Indians are qualified like that, the gold is sitting there, it is actually just regarded as a store of wealth. It's not really regarded as an item of jewelry to be used ever. Maybe it's handed down. That is zakatable. The domestic issue comes because who has to pay zakat on it, right? So men who are interested in protecting their marriages pay zakat on it, yeah? But the point is that who has the obligation to pay zakat on it is who's the owner, right? Whose is it really? Okay, whose is it? So the reason why I've had issues genuinely is because, and it's not funny enough, yesterday I was doing a workshop elsewhere and a similar question came up, was that what if a man cannot pay zakat on the jewelry? You can have situations where the man is struggling financially, right? Maybe he doesn't even have to pay zakat if he just assesses his own affairs. But we've literally got £30,000 of gold, which obviously will never touch unless the house burns down and everything goes completely wrong. Even then we might consider not touching it because it's just, it is the untouchable thing, right? Yeah. But the £30,000 has £30,000 of gold has annual zakat of whatever it is, right? Yeah. Right, exactly. There you go.
Good amount of arithmetic.
Yeah, it's getting that into the week. £750. Yeah, £750, which is no small figure for someone who may be struggling. So what should happen in that scenario? Well, zakat is still due, but some gold should be sold. Yeah, and etc. etc. So it does depend on basically where you fall on this issue. Many people, to be safe, just include it and pay it. Yeah. Sorry.
I had an interesting discussion about, so basically people talk about it should be zakat, but the disposable wealth is zakatable. So you say you're like a early professional or something, and you're saving up money for a house, for example. Some people think that actually that isn't zakatable because that's something you're saving up. So where do you?
Yeah, all your cash is zakatable. So whatever your intention is, like you can be saving up for Hajj, and even that is zakatable. Yeah. So even if that means that your Hajj has to delay one year, it's unlikely because it's quite marginal. But that 2.5%, if that means literally, I literally can't afford to go. Okay, then you don't need to go the following year then. So it doesn't matter what you're saving for. The only situation where that cash may become protected, quote unquote, from zakat is where it's like committed in a binding way to some transaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, the lady raises an interesting point there, and particularly for this generation, particularly for people in London, because the cost of housing is so high now, whereas in previous generations people might save for a couple of years. Ironically, based on what you said, if I understand correctly, ironically, people who are earning less and are struggling more to save, if they've got a sort of cash pot for longer, are going to end up paying more zakat than people who sort of build up the cash in order to be able to put down a deposit on a house and then convert that into property which isn't zakatable. Is that something that anybody's kind of thought about addressing, or is there some sort of I'm not talking about a loophole, but is there some sort of halal financial product that allows you to, as you say, kind of put some sort of wrapper around something that's intended for a long-term purchase like that?
No, it is a good question, right? And actually, it's interesting because asking questions around, call it managing your affairs in such a way that zakat's not basically depleting.
I'm not talking.
No,
I was talking about tax avoidance, but
yeah, So, but I'm saying, what I was going to say actually in your support that it's not a question that should be considered to be almost like impious almost, right? It's not. Interest-wise, it's so interesting because Umar radiallahu anhu, he's the second caliph, is associated with a statement or a command to the guardians of the wealth of orphans, right? And this raises another side point, which is that is zakat on the individual or on the wealth, meaning that if the wealth is actually technically a child's, the child doesn't have an individual obligation, but should still pay. This hadith, this statement or narration indicates that zakat on the wealth in principle. Anyway, he said, to the garden, invest the wealth of the orphans so that it is not eaten up by zakat. I mean, the literal translation of the statement, so it is not eaten up by zakat. Which is interesting because it's almost to say, manage your affairs, don't just let it sit there. Which is, by the way, is part of the point. Part of the wisdom of zakat is to stimulate activity. Don't just let the money sit there, right? And which comes back to the gold idea. I mean, it's just sitting there, it's not doing anything for you particularly. So anyway, coming back to your point, yes, look, it hasn't been thought about, it's been thought about. It hasn't been thought about enough that, or to the extent that there's any sort of policy changes being advocated, well, not yet anyway. I think, look, at the end of the day,
but it must be.
but are there investment things that you can products that you can put your wealth in? There are. You know, so can you invest? So say you're saving up, right? You might be saving up within an ISA, for example. You might want to save it up within a shares ISA, which is where the zakat treatment of which would be beneficial from actually lowering your zakat. You'd still have some zakat kind of thing, but it would be lower. If we get to zakat shares, we're literally going to be on to 10 o'clock, so go to our website. But so are there these things existing that out there that you could? Yes, you could. But at the same time, I just want to say this, is that obviously, there is obviously then the spiritual kind of notion and element as well. The right of those who don't have. Yeah, it's all very well we're saving up for a deposit, but guess what? There are people who that forget the house is a dream, like saving more than £1,000 is a dream. So in the process of doing that, it's kind of, there's still that communal obligation, whilst we are trying to also fulfill our own aspirations. Yeah. So there is that to be borne in mind, and the fact is 2.5%. It's not a lot. You know, £10,000. All right, you want £250. It's about 9,750. You're all right. You're okay. You know, the house is possible. You know. So,
I think what I'd like to add is like zakat also basically it triggers the point where it encourages them to invest into business ventures and activities. So it's a reducing balance method of telling you that if you keep your wealth sitting somewhere, you can't hide it, it will go away with the zakat. So it encourages people to become an entrepreneur and taking risk of their wealth, which equally distributes the wealth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which, exactly, and generates more zakat.
Actually, I'm going to call it a loophole because it's an enormous loophole. Somebody could technically own 100 properties and pay less zakat than me, by the logic of that.
Yeah.
Which is, if the approach that you're mentioning, that how zakat is supposed to be calculated, it is fundamentally a flaw in it. Because you can imagine other business approaches. I mean, what do you think wealthy people do? They're always looking for the way in order to avoid paying more of their money. And essentially you've outlined there one very simple example of how a multi-millionaire could own 500 properties in London, and somebody who doesn't even own anything are paying the same amount. So fundamentally, there should be a conception of how you calculate it or where you get it from, whether it's on the actual wealth you have in total or whatever it is. You have to look at it that way. Otherwise, it is a loophole, and it's a loophole that every wealthy person is going to look for.
Yeah, but it's unlikely someone with that amount of properties is not going to have massive income.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, what if he funnels that income into more purchases?
Yeah, fine. So, okay, fine. So, if he does, then this is the point, though. You see,
sorry, just one last thing. It's not also stimulating anything in the economy. It actually makes, by what we have in London, it makes other people actually trying to buy something to live in more difficult. And it's actually going to be gouging the prices of people essentially over time because, well, your rent has to go up in order to pay for your properties. There's no benefit to it at all, other than to the person who owns it.
But on that scale, is it not by way of business then? So that's not actually a personal possession. You can't sort of possess personally, say, 20 properties that you're not actually using.
No, he said that if you buy it without the express intention to sell it, i.e. a property developer.
Yeah, but if you're a rent seeker, i.e. you are owning a portfolio of properties and that is your business, that is how you generate your income, then that is something that you're sort of using as stock by way of business. It's
not quite, because there's a difference between stock is basically bought to sell. Yeah. So, for example, even in a business scenario, like your, let's say it's your factory. The factory is producing items. The factory itself, the value of the factory itself, is not subject to zakat, right? That's just yeah. So that's not subject to zakat, right? I understand what you're saying, but it's a long discussion. There's a lot of different factors involved, because one could argue that there's first of all, it needs to be looked at in a more comprehensive way, meaning would even in a Muslim kind of level, run or governed setup, is there the possibility of applying more taxes other than zakat? Yes, there is. The contention assumes that more zakat paid by this person is necessarily the point. Does God just want zakat to be paid on whatever He wants zakat to be paid on, whatever the amount is? It will be enough. I mean, all things considered, it will be enough, right? As a collective. Yes.
You mentioned earlier well, perhaps somebody else mentioned it. An idea is distribution of funds. Necessarily in a capitalistic system, there's an upward trend in terms of where money goes. Now, it's a very easy way to keep it up there to say, well, I've got 300 potential holiday homes that I'd like to visit, but in the meantime, I'll have somebody renting there.
Yeah, sure.
It fundamentally blocks any sort of distribution.
If looked at in isolation, if you looked at it in purely isolation, but it assumes that there's just no other policies whatsoever going on. You see, that's the thing. So it just needs to be looked at in context of other possibilities, right, and other kinds of policies going, which obviously can and should be instituted, right? That's what I would say.
But isn't there some sort of ruling which says that you have to have a cap to your personal needs?
How do you mean?
So, for example, I could take Marwan's route of tax avoidance and keep buying the biggest house I can every year, or I could say, morally, I don't want to do that because it's wrong. I only need a 2-bedroom flat, and any excess I have, I'll give it to zakat.
Yeah, but that's an individual choice of conscience. I'm not sure, certainly from a letter of the law standpoint, right, it's quite hard to say that there's a problem with that. And by the way, one thing I would say, take America, yeah, or take the United Kingdom, take even London, right, and the property situation as it is. Collectively speaking, as we have already identified, on a top-down, or from a personal standpoint, we may cite that this seems a little bit unfair on an individual level. On a collective level, can sufficient zakat be generated from the overall situation of people, right? Absolutely. There's a heck of a lot of zakat to be paid on just what's just there and sitting there, right, overall. So just some of your real estate kind of, how you want to do the whole real estate market and the policies around that and how we want that to look, it's a related discussion. It's also quite a separate discussion, I would say. That's all.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Lady with the sunglasses on.
I just wanted some clarity about social enterprises. So I've been running a charity and I work with very destitute people in Bangladesh. So is zakat allowed in terms of micro grants that you're giving to say, so let's take the fisherman I work with. If I gave him money, is that okay? Or does he have to be poor and therefore it's food he's getting? Or is he allowed to get it because he needs to repair his boat, or maybe he needs a replacement boat? So then it is classed as social enterprise. Because I was just looking on your website about the 8 classes. I just want to see how social enterprise fits into that, because you talked about zakat empowering and also boosting and, you know, the circular economy.
Yeah.
So, is it yes or no? Or?
Yeah, so most probably yes, but I think the individual circumstances of a beneficiary need to be assessed. So in this person's scenario, basically we need to make an assessment of, I mean, there are two fundamental ways that these scholars would look at, is someone technically eligible to receive zakat? So some of them would look at it on a more balance sheet view. Today, does this person have more or less than the nisab? Yeah? But a view that seems to be, I suppose, a bit more kind of rounded or comprehensive or maybe suitable at the moment is this person, to what extent does this person have self-sufficiency for their basic needs? Yeah? So, for example, if this fisherman actually, year round, right, he's doing okay. Yeah? I mean, maybe he's even doing okay to the extent that he might even have to pay a bit of zakat. Then no, not as a priority, you wouldn't say that. If he's really struggling, right, if his boat's not repaired, his whole means of thing is gone 2 or 3 months down the line, he's going to be struggling, then yes, absolutely.
But and that's where social enterprise gets more interesting, so that's quite a clear-cut, maybe, example. So let's take that a bit further. Sorry if I'm taking up time.
No, it's fine.
It's really interesting because I get requests all the time. So I also now, I run a social enterprise. So I'm sitting here in a t-shirt that's just been made by garment workers that I'm working with, right? Female garment workers in a worker-owned factory. Are they classed now as people in need because they've helped make, say, like a product, but they're trying to lift themselves out of poverty and they don't meet the threshold? Is that zakat? Could I take, whether it's my zakat or anyone else's zakat, and actually use it on them?
When you say use it on them, I mean the point is that it needs to be used on them in a way that they want, or in a way that you can agree with them.
Yeah.
So meaning that they need to be beneficiaries of it in a way that they've understood that they're beneficiaries of it, if you like.
Okay.
Not just it's not just okay, as payers we just go and do anything that we think is in their interest, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and then they've not been part of that kind of.
So here's a clear example then. If they're working in a worker-owned factory, the whole point is taking some lump of zakat and giving it to their factory because the factory.
Yeah, when you say give it to their factory, it depends what that means.
Oh.
So if it's like an additional payout for everybody, perfect. Because now I get an additional cash payment, I can basically go and do what I want. I have autonomy, I can do what I want. If it's basically, oh, we're going to go and spend it on this because this might be in everyone's best interest, well, if there's a worker-owned factory, they should presumably decide on that as a collective.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they're cool with it, as the owner beneficiaries, if you like, then perhaps, yeah.
So they could be eligible for.
Could be, but obviously it all needs to be looked at specific circumstances. Should be.
Sorry, one more question. I just want to say and ask your opinion, and welcome to get opinions from others. One of the things that really disappoints me and disgusts me is when I go back and I see our own British, be it Bangladeshis, I've heard about this in Pakistan, and the concept of dispersing zakat in wads of cash notes and then just handing them out, and the whole frenzy that ensues. I would imagine that's quite negligible, because one of the things about zakat as well is not to do it in a glorifying way, where you are then giving it so that others feel gratitude, or I'd like some opinion on that, actually, if that's okay.
Well, I think you've made the point, and obviously, if we're going to give it in a way that demeans the beneficiary, then clearly it's going to.
Does it cancel out?
I think that's for God to decide, really. But you're probably not setting yourself up for not setting yourself up. Well, someone wouldn't be setting themselves up for maximum acceptance by going about it in that way.
But lots of people do it, so
Well,
it's like it's very common.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think we've probably got time for maybe about one more question. Other question?
The question was around the point of taxation now. Let's say we're a non-Muslim country here, but when you look at the summary of our tax returns or the summary that we get at the end of the year, it says it's used for education, for NHS, for charity and so forth. Now, if I was in Pakistan or any other Muslim country, there is some form of connection where they just deduct it from my tax and they spend it on these sort of courses. But being here in the UK, does that not cover my payment of zakat as well?
All right.
There is an opinion there, and there are some scholars who said that.
Yeah. So I would say, to bring it all together from what we were discussing earlier as well, that is there a case, if we understand zakat in the way that we've discussed at the beginning, which is that it's an intra-community resourcing mechanism whose fundamental purpose is to either preserve or promote this phenomenon of Islam in society, then is there a case for the welfare-related aspects of that, which a portion of my tax contributions are used for in relation to call it Muslim welfare in the society in which I live? Is there a case for the fact that that could count as part of my zakat? I think yes, there is. Yeah? But not clearly for the other elements, because obviously those things need to be organised from by us as Muslims to decide on what institutions or things that we want to support, which we think are in the best interests of Islam Muslims. So, for example, some of the things that we're supporting or funding in relation to that are institutions such as the Cambridge Muslim College, such as the Centre for Media Monitoring, which basically now is a unit that's set up to actually work with, defend, but also work with media, senior kind of media figures and whatnot to basically make sure that Islam Muslims are not overly disparaged or spoken about in a way that's clearly damaging, right, to public perception, etc., and other such kind of things. So those kind of things clearly we're going to have to do. The other part, is there a case for that? Yes, there is. But I think that more are we in a position to give some clear guidance on that right now? No. So in the meantime, and having said that, just one last thing I'll say is that obviously in our specific case, obviously we're set up in a way at the moment where despite whatever is going on at that level, clearly there are still many Muslims presenting themselves within our community. Like we're now, in 2019, we expect to have had 7,000 Muslims in this country have been either referred or approached us for support. Yeah, and at least 3/4 of those, or 80% of those, are people who we would support. Yeah, so meaning that even if one is doing that and that's having its effect, if one is able to pay the zakat, right, then pay it, as long as if it's not as if there isn't enough demand, So I suppose that we could look at it in that way.
Why would you support Muslims in this country who can depend on social benefits rather than the really needy poor people in the third world?
For a lot of the...
Sorry, just on that, because how I understand that zakat should be prioritised locally. So if you're in the UK, we should, of course, zakat should be distributed globally, but priority should be given locally. Is that the correct understanding? Or?
Yeah, so obviously it's another whole massive issue of contention, right? There's no... Oh, I finished, right?
Yeah, sorry.
He got in too quick. Right, so... again, coming back to what we said earlier, okay? If zakat is a communal resource or mechanism, right, and classically was organised in this kind of, in the way that it was organised, then actually in principle, because it has an overarching purpose in the way that we discussed, in principle, actually, internationalising zakat to the extent that we do at the moment, is seems to be a very, very significant departure from what the actual original spirit of it was. I mean, like was mentioned, the UK government gives 1% of it or whatever it is, right, for different international development. You and I would consider it morally outrageous were they to do the opposite. Give 99% of tax revenue, to deal with poor people all over the world and to support them. We would still consider it more outrageous. Why? I'm paying that for particular outcomes in the environment in which I am, for me, my children, the community, and all of the rest of it. So that's point number one. Classically, it was always localized, meaning it was looked at the affairs of the Muslims would organize themselves within their localities to build up services and support and what have you within their respective areas. And obviously, and the other point to mention is this: is that remember, if we're saying that the purpose of zakat is to support and promote Islam, at what level therefore should zakat be organised? Well, at the level where Muslims can reasonably organise themselves with each other for some common, coherent purpose and way of doing that. Yeah. So regardless of what we do as Muslims here, zakat paying around the world, when a Muslim in our own community presents themselves in a situation of difficulty, and they are zakat eligible, then we should be there to support them. Of course, if you get into the issue of relative poverty, the problem is then, I would just say on that front, let's not just make that as a zakat issue then. Because for every part of our excess spend, right, like somebody somewhere is not getting a food pack as a result. The fact that I bought an iPhone versus some other cheaper thing, well, the difference of a few hundred quid I could have sent off, right? So the moral issue there is not particular to zakat. It's like, well, let's just look at all of our spending there. It's also true to say that the back home mentality is flawed in a number of different ways. So there is no recommendation, or particularly to pay zakat on the basis of simply like some sort of ethnic or cultural kind of affiliation, like that as a prime motivator for where to direct one's zakat. It's also the case that oftentimes us having to do that is only compensating for the fact that in those particular areas or countries, like the disorganization in those places, there is no shadow of a doubt that the zakat of Pakistan is enough to deal multiple times over with the poverty in Pakistan, or in Bangladesh, or in India, or in the Middle East, or in most of these places. No doubt whatsoever. Are there some regions which are particular? Yeah, of course, right? But we need to look at it from the perspective of what the future of Islam Muslims is in this society where we are most accountable, right? Then we need to organize, like, where we pay, we pray. Where we pray, we pay. Like, all of this sort of comes together. Where we are ambassadors and represent Islam is where the resources goes, where the prayer happens, and where it all comes together and synergizes to have a net effect, right, in the way that it should. Really, technically speaking, zakat should be flowing into this country. Because remember, the purpose is moving Islam forward. Let's look at the state of Islam here. And it's that state of Islam that we need to really be thinking about how we're then deploying our resources against. In the context of which you look at the welfare issues, you look at the community development issues, leadership investment, and blah, 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 and all the rest of it.
I don't really agree.
That's okay.
I think if you're faced with a choice between looking at social welfare development versus life and death,
Yeah.
if you have those two scenarios, you choose life and death.
Yeah, but this is the point though, right? The issue with that is twofold. And I'll probably leave it there, right? Because we can carry it on. Okay? It's obviously an ongoing debate. There's two problems with that approach though, things just to think about at least. Number one is that it assumes that, again, individual choice is the thing with this. Then it becomes personal charity. It's just personal charity. Then we should just say, we're kind of approaching zakat in that way. It's personal charity, I'll decide wherever I feel it's most needed. Then fine, we'll go there. This year it's that, the other year it's that, the other. All of the things that we've spoken about are necessarily cannot be achieved with that approach. And so there is a portfolio way to look at it. Zakat has its objective, but with my voluntary giving I can go to town all day long. I can do what I like. Yeah? So that's okay there, that's number one. Number two is it again assumes that alleviating the material poverty is the end in and of itself. It's not the end in and of itself, we've discussed that at length. So it's not that the life and death situations all over the place are not important for us to go and deal with. But it's also not true to say that the first thing that we're going to be accountable for on the Day of Judgment, right, is the life and death scenarios of millions of people around the world, right, over and above the obligation to represent God in the community in which we happen to put us. Because the poverty, the ultimate poverty that this zakat is trying to deal with, okay, is that poverty. And that poverty will only be dealt with in the society in which we're in when we actually invest to represent and move Islam forward in the way. Like, if we as Muslims remain in this country, a community that is where a Muslim in this country today is more than twice as likely to be in poverty, relatively though it may be, right, compared to anybody else in wider society. That undermines Islam, internally, externally, left, right and centre. All of the issues and the way Islam is seen and perceived from the outside, right, those issues are hugely important issues to deal with, right? And I would argue that fundamentally we are more responsible for that. If you look at the whole worldview that we have, and you put this in the context of the Shahada and what actually human existence is for in the end, right? I.e. material, spiritual beings going through a temporary material existence rather than the other way around, right? And looked at in that worldview, then the balance, I think, of that slightly changes. But I do totally appreciate, right, where you're coming from, and it's a tough issue, it's a big issue because like the level of devastation and poverty and desolation that exists everywhere. I mean, forget zakat. That's what I'm saying. It's not really about. It's not a zakat issue, right? It's like even to the extent that should I save up that deposit to go and buy the house? Really? I can just rent and may find a cost saving, just send it all. Keep sending it because that poverty is still there, and it's not just waiting for my zakat. What about my everything else? You see what I mean? So we can't also be very selective on that issue because it's not as if the moral issues in relation to that are just specific to zakat itself. But it's a long conversation.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Iqbal. I'm afraid then we will have to leave it. I'm sure we'll hang around for sort of a few minutes to answer any of the sort of personal questions that people have got just while we pack.
Can I say one thing very quickly, which is that as far as the zakat calculation stuff is concerned, our website is full of resources for that, just if you need help with any of that. And we also have the provision for you to be able to book like a telephone consultation as well in Ramadan, so like you can go on and you can basically book a consultation or just, if you need help with that. So I know it's an area of, there's a lot there to come for people to get to grips with sometimes, and as I spoke about before, you've got Mr. Card and all of that stuff, you can refer to that.